All right, it looks like we are live. James, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, sure. First of all, feel free to call me Jim. So I am a professor. I teach the history and theology of the early and medieval Christian church. So I'm not an evangelist. I'm not a preacher. I'm not an apologist. So I was happy when you invited me to this that you made a point to say this is not a debate, because I'm really not into debating. Basically, I have a PhD in the history of the Roman Empire, the early Christian church, and the theology of the early and medieval church. So I'm not here to tell you what to think or believe, but you sort of invited me to talk about why I believe what I do. And, it just so happens we have in one of our scriptures, St. Peter wrote, "Always be ready to give an explanation to anyone who asks you for a reason for your hope." So I couldn't say no. So thanks for the invitation. And here we are.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. So I'm an atheist, by which I mean I believe that all of the different things we see in the world can best be explained by natural explanations. I don't think that supernatural or God explanations work better than any of the natural ones in any way. Could you tell me some of the reasons you believe there are for belief in a God?
Yeah, what I'd like to do, if it's all right with you, is first define our terms, because as I always tell my students, you cannot just say the word God anymore, if you ever could, and expect people to know what you're talking about or agree with you. So I feel like we have to first define who we mean by the God I believe in. Then I'd like to give you a couple of bits of what I think are pretty solid evidence for the existence of God. But then finally, I want to tell you why I believe in God, if that kind of scenario works for you.
Sure.
Okay. So who is God? What do you mean by God? Who do I mean when I say I believe in God? Now, I'm not a philosopher, but if you think about sort of Plato's philosophy and the idea of the ideal forms versus the shadows, this idea that the things that exist in reality are the things that exist in the material world are shadows of a more real reality, which we might call these ideal forms. If you think of it in that terms, in those terms, then we know what good is, we know what beauty is, we know what love is, or at least we think we do. But these things are all shadows of a greater reality. So the ideal form of all good is God. The ideal form of all beauty is God. The ideal form of all love, all creativity, all rationality is God. I mean, this is so God is the first cause of the uncaused cause of all existence, which we refer to as the creator. But God is distinct from creation, so not, present within it because God is omnipresent, but not contained by it, not limited by it. So the point of all this is to say right up front, this is not some hypothetical God that we're talking about. We're talking about a very specific God that I believe in. It's the God of the Judeo-Christian scriptures. And, those of us who believe in this God believe that God has revealed himself to humanity, right? And so we know things about this God because God has communicated things to us. We believe in the God who has reached out to humanity, not some hypothetical deity who is the result of human speculation. And so, there's a lot of mythologies and a lot of different cultures that are sort of, multiple gods made in the image of humans. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a specific God who has reached out to humanity in some very unique ways. So we know what this God wants from us. And, I've watched a little bit of your stuff here before. So, we're not talking about leprechauns. We're not talking about hypothetical deities who demand nose picking on Tuesdays, right? This is a very specific God. And that's important when we start talking about why we believe in God. So, that's who God is. Now, let me give you a couple of pieces of what I think are evidence for the existence of God. But I want to say up front, these are not proofs for the existence of God. I don't think there is any such thing as proof of the existence of God. Not proof that would convince a skeptic anyway. And I think this is by design, which I can say more about that later. But just to mention two pieces of evidence. So I've heard you say actually that if you could be convinced of the resurrection of Jesus, that would be a piece of evidence for the existence of God, right? I mean,
Sure.
yeah. So I do believe that evidence is there for this reason. When Jesus was executed, his followers were scattered and scared. And then something happened to turn them into these bold evangelists who were willing to risk their lives to tell the story of his resurrection. And I believe the only thing that adequately explains that is the resurrection. I don't think you could make up that story because there were too many people around who would simply not believe it because they would know it not to be true. And so ultimately all of that results in the very existence of the church, Christianity, billions of believers in every culture, a church on every corner that stands the test of time. Now, again, I'm not claiming this proves the existence of God. All I'm saying is this. I believe that the existence of the church is evidence of the resurrection of Jesus, and the resurrection of Jesus is evidence for the existence of God. So that would be one piece of evidence. The other one I would highlight, I think, for me, is that I do find the BVG proof convincing, which I'm sure you know what that is. It's
The Board Guth Lincoln.
yeah. What's that?
BGV, Board Guth Lincoln.
Yeah. It's named after the three physicists. And again, I am not a scientist, but as I understand it, the bottom line is nothing by itself can go from not existing to existing, or nothing on its own can go from non-life to life without some outside force exerting on it. And of course, that force is God. So I get that there are answers to this, and it's not necessarily always convincing to the skeptic, but I find it convincing. I find that a convincing piece of evidence. So those are a couple of things that I would point to as evidence for the existence of God. We haven't quite gotten to the real reason why I believe in God, but we can get to that. But those are the kinds of things. Somebody asks me for evidence, that's what I would throw out there.
So, first question: the Borg-Guth-Lincoln theorem, as I understand it, doesn't actually say anything about like the beginning of everything. It just says that inflation had a beginning. So, like, it doesn't say the universe began to exist. It says that the universe's inflation, the fact that it was spreading, began. So, I don't. Why would that be evidence of a God?
Well, I mean, I think it does say more than that, but I that's not my area of expertise. But I think that if you assume that the universe has a beginning, then you have to ask the question naturally. You have to ask the question, what about before the beginning, right? And I mean, if the universe is continually expanding, then at some point it was a point at the beginning, and I mean, ultimately for me, it's the question of life, right? Nothing that is non-life can spontaneously turn into life, and so I mean, that's why I think that the whole very existence of the universe, let alone life itself, requires a creator, an outside force, an uncaused cause. And I think you had that one guest on who talked about the sort of the fine tuning argument, and I think there's some validity to that too, in the sense that there's I think odds are that there's more probability in nothing existing than something existing, and there's certainly more probability in no life existing than life existing. And when you throw in the law of entropy, right now, that sort of rules out the idea that, well, matter is not eternal because matter decays. And, so when you throw in the law of entropy, it's like, I'm convinced. Again, I'm not saying you have to be convinced. I'm just saying, you're asking me what I see as evidence. That would be one piece of evidence.
All right, cool. So you brought up a few things there. The cosmological argument, the universe is beginning, the fine-tuning argument, the second law of thermodynamics, entropy, non-life from life, resurrection, and the existence of the church. So I do want to start with the BGV because I don't usually get to talk about that one. It's a really interesting topic. So I wanted to show you something really quick. Here.
Sure. Keep in mind, I'm not a scientist.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, I forgot. I gotta do there's a button. You gotta press the button at the bottom for the audio, which is weird. I don't know why it does that. It's very weird.
Arvin Board, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin were able to prove that any universe, which is on average in a state of cosmic expansion throughout its history, cannot be infinite in the past, but must have a past space-time boundary. What makes their proof so powerful is that it holds regardless of the physical description of the very early universe. So in fact, the Bohr-Guth-Vilenkin theorem does imply an absolute beginning of the universe.
I was working with Arvin Borda and Alex Vilenkin to understand what we can learn about how inflation might have started and how far back it could have gone. And in particular, once we realized that inflation could be eternal into the future, it seemed like a very natural question to ask. Could inflation have also been eternal into the past? And what we found was that inflation could not be eternal into the past. What we basically managed to achieve was proving a theorem which says that any expanding region of space-time that has some minimum expansion rate can only go back so far and not infinitely far. So that means that inflation must have had a beginning. It doesn't really say that the universe must have had a beginning, but it says that the universe could not have been expanding forever up until the present time.
So we interviewed by Ashtekar, and in their model they have a bouncing universe, and they said, well, that means the universe could be eternal in the past, and that theorem doesn't prevent that. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right.
The theorem proves that inflation must have a beginning, right? The universe as a whole, the theorem doesn't say that. It says that the expansion of the universe must have a beginning, right? So, but it opens the door somewhat for alternatives.
As we've seen.
So that was Alan Guth and Vilenkin, the two of the authors, and they specifically say this doesn't actually say the universe had a beginning. So I find this really interesting because I know William Lane Craig uses it, and it's a thing many theists say, but having actually looked into the theory, it doesn't say that. And so it's a very interesting thing that people bring up.
Well, I think you're playing with the definition of universe here, which is fine. I mean, that's what those guys do. But, the question becomes then, well, what is the universe? What is the universe without matter? What is the universe without that expansion? I mean, the cosmos was formless and void. Okay, fine. Genesis 1:1. But I mean, I'm just saying, I find it convincing to say that, without a creator, without an intelligent creator, it's more probable that nothing would exist than that anything exists. And certainly that's the case with life. But again, all of these, I've admitted up front, these are not proofs for the existence of God. I mean, they might be called proofs in the sense of a theorem or something, but none of this proves the existence of God, because you can't prove the existence of God, which is why I say up front, I'm not an apologist. I'm not an evangelist. I'm not here to prove the existence of God. It can't be done. But I can tell you why I believe in God, which is, maybe where we need to go from here rather than sort of getting stuck on the physics.
I just want to clarify. So I agree you can't prove God. That's fine. I'm more interested in what is the evidence? Is there anything that increases the probability of it being true rather than false? And I don't need it to go over 50%. That's my argument, is that I don't think any of the arguments actually do increase the probability. Like the Bohr-Guth-Vilenkin theorem doesn't seem to increase the probability of a God, because it doesn't say anything about the universe existing. Guth was specifically asked, there's a cyclic model where the universe just bounces in and out, bounces in and out. And he said, would that be inconsistent with inflation? He'd be like, no, that also works with inflation. So the universe doesn't need to have a beginning. Only the inflation, which is the expansion, needs to have a beginning. And so the BGV theorem doesn't in any way indicate the universe had a beginning. The second argument you brought up, with the cosmological argument, that it's more plausible to have nothing than something. And I assume you mean like matter and life and those kinds of things. That one's an interesting argument, because I think that um, if we assume that fine tuning is real, like in physics, they agree there is this fine tuning that the probability that particles would exist requires a very specific set of relationships between the physical constants, the gravitational constant, the energy constant, all those different things. But so if we change them in any way, there'd be no matter. The expansion rate too fast, too slow, not enough strong or weak electromagnetic forces to hold particles together. But the problem is that even if that's true, whatever designed that must be equally as fine-tuned. So for example, for every possible kind of universe, there's a possible God who could want that universe. So maybe a universe with only puppies, or a universe with only black holes, or a
Yeah.
universe with only hydrogen atoms. And so
Sure.
for each possible kind of way the universe could be, there's a possible way God could be in such that he would want that universe. And so if you want to say that because there's this large spectrum of possible universes and only a very few allow for life, well, there's also a large spectrum of possible gods and only a few create a life-permitting universe. And so the same probabilistic problem exists in both. And it seems to be kicking the can down the road. It doesn't actually seem to be evidence of a God, because all of the other solutions are equally probable. That's deterministic, random chance, whatever. And God is equally as fine-tuned as the universe must be necessarily. And so it doesn't actually solve the fine-tuning problem.
Well, yeah, and I wasn't actually bringing that up as one of my most convincing pieces of evidence. Although I do find something in it. But I mean, when you say, okay, well then there's a infinite number of possibilities for gods who might want something else. This is where we're crossing that line into speculation about other gods. I'm talking about this one specific God who has revealed himself to us. So I don't know about other possible gods. I just know about this one. And this is the universe we live in. And, we have one God to deal with. And that's who it is. So maybe, I should just get to sort of the heart of this, because what you're really asking me is, why do I believe in God? And, any judge or lawyer will tell you that one of the most important kinds of evidence is the testimony of witnesses. And the bottom line is this: I believe in God because I believe the testimony of all the witnesses. Thousands of years of witness in the Hebrew religion, 2,000 years of witness in Christianity. I believe that God has reached out to humanity in various ways, and that there are so many witnesses to this revelation of himself that you can't count them all. And many of them left written records, which I can read, and I do read them. So in addition to what's in our Holy Scriptures, the Bible, there are hundreds of thousands of pages of testimony by the early Christians and the medieval Christians, etc. So I believe the testimony of the witnesses. Now, here's the important piece of the puzzle, because it's sort of easy to argue, well, there's a lot of books out there, there's a lot of myths out there. Why this? And here's the reason. I believe the written records of the witnesses because when I read them, their experience rings true for me because it's consistent with my own. In other words, I believe the witnesses because I am one of them, because my own experience tells me that God exists. And so when I read the wisdom of these thousands of years of people in relationship with God, I read that and I say, yes, that's true because I know it to be true because I've experienced that as well. I mean, look, I live in Florida. I live in a place where I'm surrounded by palm trees, right? There are palm trees in my yard. I drive down the street and the streets are lined with palm trees. But imagine if a person who lived his whole life in Alaska, who never had TV or movies and never saw a palm tree, imagine if he tried to convince me that palm trees don't exist. I know from my experience that palm trees do exist. But the Alaskan would be arguing from his own lack of experience. And he would say, because I've never experienced a palm tree, therefore they don't exist. But I know palm trees exist. That's why I know God exists, because of my own experience.
Okay, so a few things there. Like I find all of the points you brought up very interesting because I don't understand why Christians see them as evidence, or why theists see them as evidence, like the BGV. I don't understand why they see that evidence. That's why I think it's interesting to talk about, because to me, it doesn't seem like the conclusion of that is there is a God, or that it even indicates a higher probability of a God. And so I like going through all the different things you mentioned. I think they're all really interesting arguments. If you want to start with the testimony one, I think that's the most important. To me, I don't see, like in a court of law, you brought up a court of law, testimony that UFOs or leprechauns or unicorns or miracles or magic all get thrown out. They're just immediately thrown out. Like, doesn't matter what your testimony is, doesn't count, because there's no precedent is the legal term. You don't have any precedent for these kinds of things. It's not allowed in a courtroom. You have to have some kind of a legal precedent to say that this is a actual thing in the world before it's qualified, because of witch hunts and all the other court cases we've gone through that show that they are not real. And so in order to...
Sure. This is not Miracle on 34th Street. I mean, we're not trying to prove legally that God exists. What I'm saying is this: if you're accused of a crime, and you go into court and you say to the judge, I can produce 1,000 people who will testify that they did not see me commit a crime. The judge is going to throw that out, because you can't witness to nothing. You can't witness to a negative. But if there are witnesses to the crime, that's evidence for the existence of a crime. So the Christian witness is witness to an event. Witness, it's evidence in favor. Does it prove it? No. But it is evidence in favor of the Christian truth. But you can't go into a court and say, well, because I've never seen this, therefore it isn't true. Right?
Oh, right. I totally agree. I want to clarify that. If you go into a courtroom and say, I saw a unicorn or a leprechaun, that would be thrown out. It's not evidence. So evidence in testimony only counts if it has an empirical basis. Testimony for things that don't have an empirical basis don't count as evidence.
What if thousands of people over a course of thousands of years testify to something? Wouldn't you have to take that into account? I mean,
no.
The sheer number of witnesses.
Because that happens all the time. Like, we have thousands of eyewitnesses of UFOs, or we have tens of thousands of eyewitnesses of UFOs, thousands of eyewitnesses of the Loch Ness Monster, thousands of eyewitnesses of Bigfoot, hundreds of thousands of eyewitnesses of ghosts and spirits, millions of eyewitnesses of homeopathy working, tens of millions of instances of miracles in Hinduism. The number of eyewitnesses is completely irrelevant. What matters is because we know that the psychological state of humans is such that we have thousands of fallacies, biases, illusions, delusions, misconceptions, etc., that unless there is some independent way to verify this thing is real, the testimony on its own doesn't count. It does count for things we've already verified are real. So if you said, I saw Bob kill James, that's perfectly reasonable. If you said, I saw a dog, that's perfectly reasonable. If you said, I saw a unicorn, or I saw a leprechaun or a ghost or magic, all of those are going to be instantly thrown out. So testimony, and this applies into law and history, testimony is only counted as evidence if it has an empirical basis of something we already know is real, independent of our minds.
Right, but you're pushing the analogy too far. We're not really talking about proving this in court. But here's what I'll agree with you. Here's what I'll agree with you. I will admit the great human capacity to imagine things that aren't real, if you will admit the equally great human capacity to live in denial about things that are real.
Sure. I mean, there's flat earthers still, so that's clearly the case.
So I mean, the fact that people refuse to believe in something is also not proof that it doesn't exist.
Sure.
Yeah.
I totally agree, but I think that the question is it reasonable to believe based on testimony? And I don't think it is. I think that because we know, like, my argument here isn't that we're trying to prove God in a courtroom. My argument is the reason courtrooms don't count this as evidence is because it's not reasonable to believe in a court, and it's not reasonable to believe for a person either, because this isn't a good way to differentiate imagination from reality. It could be the case that somebody saw UFOs, but should we believe it? No, it's not something that someone, even the person seeing it, should be justified in believing. They'd be more rational to conclude, I probably had a delusion or a communal reinforcement experience or a bereavement delusion. The fact that these things are well documented and have lots of evidence are more plausible explanations of all of these experiences than it actually saw a UFO or God or miracles.
Well, but again, we're not trying to prove this in a court of law. I understand what you're saying about what evidence is admissible in a court. And remember, what I said was that the testimony of witnesses is one thing, thousands of witnesses over thousands of years. But the reason why I believe their testimony is because it rings true with my experience. So at the end of the day, my number one reason for believing in God is my own personal experience with God in my life. That's really the bottom line. And I can never give you my experience. You would have to have your own experience. There's no way that I could even demonstrate, let alone prove this to you. And so, I mean, I kind of knew when I came on, here that we would sort of get to this point where I'd be like, it really comes down to personal experience, and personal experience has to, personal experience, whatever your personal experience, leads you to a choice, a free will choice to believe or not to believe.
Sure. So I would say that if I had an experience of God, I probably wouldn't believe, because I think it's not rational to believe my own personal experience if it's of things that don't have an empirical basis, because it seems like all the evidence we have shows that personal experiences of imaginary things is very, very common. And so it's more evidentially likely that if I have a personal experience of a miracle, it's more likely a figment of my imagination until I can provide some kind of independent way to verify that it actually occurred, like novel testable predictions. So if I have an experience, or if anybody has an experience of UFOs, do you think that person is rational to believe in UFOs just because they had the experience, or do you think they should be skeptical and wait for some kind of independent evidence before they were rational to believe in UFOs?
Yeah, well, I think that the answer to that depends on the person. Some people are more skeptical, and it would take 4, 5, 6, maybe 10 UFO sightings before they started to believe. Other people are maybe ready to believe after one UFO sighting. That's between you and God. I mean, I can't answer that question. All I know is that I'm pretty, I would like to consider myself pretty rational too. So I think, it would take me more than one if I were to try to think back as to, when I started to believe. But, it's a combination of things in life. It's not even something, if I were to tell you, oh, I had this experience or that experience, and that's why I believe, it would seem like nothing to you. It'd be very easy for you to say, well, that was a coincidence, right? It's the cumulative effect. It's a sum total of a life in a relationship with God. And if you're ever going to believe in God, it's going to have to be because by free will, right? I mean, see, here's the thing. God is love, right? Our scriptures tell us God is love, and love does not coerce. So if there were proof for the existence of God, that would be a kind of coercion. That would be God forcing you to believe by proof. God will never do that, because love is always voluntary. God wants you to be in relationship with him, but God only wants it voluntarily, because God does not force himself on anyone. So, it's going to have to be by free will. It's going to have to be by faith. I can't give you faith,
Well, right. My question here is more, is it rational for a person to believe based off experience alone? And I don't think it is. I don't think it's rational, even if someone has lots of experiences, for them to believe, because we know of many, many different kinds of psychological cases. Like there's one where people see miniature people. This was described by Oliver Sacks in his work on psychology and neurology, that there's literally cases where people see miniature people all the time. And that's like where we think the origin of leprechauns came from. Because they have lived their lives seeing these miniature people and talking with these miniature people, are they rational to believe in the miniature people? I would say no. I'd say that in order to be rational, you need more than the personal experience. You need some way to verify that experience is more than just a product of your mind. And so for me, I don't think it's rational to purely believe on personal experience. I think you can, like, if it makes you feel good, I think that's fine. I think it's perfectly fine to believe something because it makes you feel good or because you trust it. But I don't think it's rational. I don't think it's rational to believe just because of personal experience, because we know how unreliable personal experience is. To me, it seems the rational conclusion is to say, okay, that's probably a product of my mind. And if I want to rationally believe, I would need something more than that.
But here's the thing. If your personal experience is unique in the sense that you're the only one who sees these things or who believes these things, then think twice about it. but there's a shared personal experience too. Does that make sense? I mean, there is a if there was a club on every corner where people would meet to talk about how they all see miniature people, and if that club had existed for thousands of years and stood the test of time, I mean, at least respect it, if not take it seriously, right?
Well, doesn't that exist? Like homeopathy, snake oil salesman.
Not in the way that Christianity does. But I mean, I hear what you're saying, and this gets us back to the same capacity for humans to imagine things exists as the capacity for humans to deny things. One is not more rational than the other, but a person has to choose.
Right. I think the rationality has to do with the evidence, not the choice of rejecting or accepting is independent. It's not rational, irrational. The thing that makes it rational is their evidence. That would be the determining factor here. And for me, it seems like all of the cases you listed, I don't see any difference between Christianity and the homeopathy or Falun Gong or Buddhism or Jainism or Hinduism or Zeus or Thor. To me, it seems like the exact same kind of human narrative that, yes, people all over the world have experiences of these things, but those seem to be the same kinds of experiences everybody else has for all of the other religions and fairies and leprechauns. And I don't see a difference between those psychological experiences and the ones Christians have. That to me, they seem to be the exact same thing in the brain. And I don't see why we should think they're more than that.
Well, I mean, I think when you say that you don't see the difference, that you're speaking, I mean, and I don't mean any disrespect by this, but you're speaking as an outsider looking into all these things. Here's Buddhism, here's Christianity, here's homeopathy, right? And so, I think the only way you would see the difference, the uniqueness of Christianity is from the inside, and I know that isn't going to convince you, but it doesn't make it any less true.
Well, I used to be a Christian. I was for 18 years or so, but I don't understand, is there any set of criteria that we can use to differentiate imaginary experiences of testimony in these other religions and Christian experiences? Like, if you're not an insider, if we're trying to analyze this from a perspective of, we want to know which of these are purely imaginary, which of these are not imaginary, is there any way you can show which testimonies are just the mental states? Because to me, it seems like if we're looking at it from an outside perspective, an objective, impartial perspective, and we compare Christian experiences to Hindu experiences or to homeopathic experiences or to ghost experiences, they have all of the exact same traits. I can't identify anything different about them other than, I mean, even the fact that the people in that ideology will all say that, well, you won't be able to tell a difference unless you're a believer, unless you trust, unless you have faith, unless you're someone who already adopts the ideology. And they all say that. So that's a thing that they also all share. And so I don't.
And there's truth. There is some truth to that, right? I mean, I don't claim to understand Buddhism because I'm not a Buddhist, right? I'm interested to hear. So you were a Christian at one time. What happened?
I had a lifetime of major depression for the first 30 years of my life, and I prayed every day, morning and night, for a God who I thought was all loving and cared about me more than anything in the world. And eventually I became unable to continue to believe there was such a being because it did nothing to help.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sorry you went through that. That's I can't imagine what that would have been like. I can't speak to that experience, but I can understand how you got to where you are. Did you? Yeah. So I'm not going to try to psychoanalyze you. I'm not a therapist, but I respect you for sharing that. Yeah. So I mean, but at the end of the day, I think as a theologian, I mean, I could give you, lectures on what's different about Christianity, but I don't think we need to go into that here. But there is a sense in which, what you're asking is, okay, so what criteria do you use to discern the truth versus imagination, really, is what you're saying. And I mean, I think one of the major criteria would be not to isolate yourself and to enter into some sort of community where other people are experiencing what you're experiencing, and to share experiences. And and I mean, from the Christian perspective, you would pray for wisdom, you'd pray for discernment, and you'd pray for God to help you to know what's real and what's not. And I mean, that is what we would do. I can't speak to what someone would do who doesn't have God in their lives, because to me that would be difficult. That would be it'd be hard to know, how to discern, am I in denial? Am I imagining things? Because it would be kind of a lonely journey, I think.
Well, mine, I use novel testable predictions, science. Science seems to be a very reliable way for me to differentiate imaginary beliefs from reality. And if we compare that, like using the scientific method versus praying to a God, for example, which do you think is more likely to get us to the correct answer? Because if you say, if you believe in God and you pray to him, it seems like begging the question, where if you start with your conclusion and then you look for an answer with your conclusion. And it seems like all the ideologies do that. Like if you believe in the Bhagavad Gita, well, you should adhere to the Bhagavad Gita. And if it changes your life, well, then you'll experience the warmth of the Hindu gods. That's one of the things I get from the Hindu cultures all the time. So it seems like all the ideologies will say, if you want to differentiate imagination from reality, trust our ideology, and then if you follow it, you'll see a change in your life, something like that. But they all say that. And
Okay, but the mistake you're making is, I'm not suggesting an either-or proposition. I'm not saying abandon the scientific method and give up on science in order to be a theist. I'm saying both is better than one. I mean, science does not contradict faith, right? Science has answers for different questions, and science is good as far as it goes. But I mean, it's not in competition with religious faith, or religious faith is not opposed to science in any way.
I'm not sure what you mean by that, because from my perspective, science is a method to differentiate imagination from reality in all contexts. Doesn't matter what it is. It's just, if you need some method to differentiate imagination from reality. Science works very, very well. And for me, faith and prayer doesn't seem to work at all. It doesn't seem, I've never seen any cases where that has worked outside of.
I mean, I can tell you it works in my life and in the lives of many people that I know, and historically through the lives of millions of people. I can't give you that experience, but I can witness to it. That is my witness testimony. But again, I stand by the conviction that science asks and answers a different set of questions than religious faith does, and they may overlap, but they're not incompatible.
Again, I'm not sure what you mean by that, because for me, any question you ask, doesn't matter what it is, you need some way to differentiate, is this an imaginary conclusion or is it real? You need something. Science works really well for me. I use it for essentially everything. But you're saying there's this other method that also works to differentiate imagination from reality. But I've never seen it work. I've never seen this other method successfully demonstrate something as real rather than imaginary. It seems like it indicates more imaginary things than real things when we apply it to anything that we can verify. Whenever we try to apply this method of prayer or worship or belief, it seems to fail in every metric we can ever measure at successfully identifying anything in reality.
I mean, who's we here? Because I would not agree with that at all. It doesn't fail, but it takes, well, I mean, I'm not going to sort of, try to teach you about, Christian spirituality. I mean, that's not really why we're here. But science cannot answer every question. It just can't. Sure. And, especially questions of a metaphysical nature, science cannot answer those questions. But the important point is to get back to what I said, which is, I'm not suggesting faith versus science. I'm suggesting we listen to science, but within the context of religious faith. I mean, we're never And by the way, I'm seeing a lot of anti-Florida stuff in the chat. You guys are just
Really?
jealous.
I like Florida. It's warm. I'm in cold Minnesota.
Yeah.
But so I understand what you're saying, and I get that a lot. So from a lot of the different people I talk to, they say, "Oh no, science asks a different kind of question." So it doesn't debunk my ideology. It's completely separate. But for me, I think that's like avoiding the issue, because the issue isn't whether or not science conflicts. The issue is, does your method work to differentiate imagination from reality? It doesn't matter if it conflicts with science. And so if we try to verify your method, we have to verify it with something we know that works, which is science. We know science works. So like when we try to do prayer studies, the Templeton Foundation, massive Christian $billion foundation, has done dozens of prayer studies to see if prayer actually works. They all fail, all get like no results.
That's ridiculous. You came to me and said, we're going to do a study to see if prayer works, I would laugh in your face. It does. That's not how it works. I mean,
is there any way to verify that it does work at all? Like, how do we verify it works?
That's the point, because if we could verify it, that would be proof. And if there were proof, it wouldn't require faith. Now, look, we live in a world with paradox, right? So if you want the virtue of courage, there has to be danger. You want a world without danger, you're going to have a world without courage. If you want the virtue of faith, there has to be mystery. If you want a world without mystery, that would be a world without faith. So for whatever reason, God in God's wisdom has chosen to create a world where we don't have all the answers. But not having all the answers is not proof of the non-existence of God, right? It just shows that there's mystery in the world, which means if you're going to believe, it's going to have to be voluntary, by your free will, not because you were coerced by proof.
But doesn't that just admit that it doesn't differentiate imagination from reality? Like if it can't show that,
not in a scientific proofy sense. I mean, no. If you want me to tell you how I can convince you of a way that I differentiate truth from imagination, can't be done. Can't be done. It's in my spiritual life, and this is my experience along with billions of other people. We've all had the same experience. We can't give you our experience. We can only testify, witness to it.
Well, that's the question. I think that was the question I'm asking. How do you differentiate imagination from reality? For me, it's pretty simple. I can say, if I want to say something is true about reality and not my imagination, then I can build a model. And if it can accurately predict the future, that's a good reason to believe that the model corresponds to reality and not my imagination, because my imagination is bad at predicting the future. So I can give a very concise, effective methodology to differentiate imagination from reality that works extremely well. And we can test this against science and say, yes, this works extremely well. It gives us the correct answer with a very high degree of certainty. And so anything that can pass this test is rational to believe it is not imaginary. But if you say you believe based on faith, then faith can't do that. Doesn't that admit that it can't differentiate imagination from reality? Or is there, because there could be other methods, like I'm not saying science is the only necessary method to do this, it's just the only one I know of. Is how do you show to yourself that faith does differentiate imagination from reality as opposed to just being imaginary?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's partly just personal experience over time, what plays out, what turns out to be true, and it's partly the shared experience of the church, right? So no, it doesn't rule out discerning reality from imagination. It only rules out me being able to prove it to you.
I'm more interested in you proving it to yourself. So like if I wanted to prove something to myself, I would say predict the future. If I can accurately predict the future, then I would be rational to believe it. But if it's just something that we know,
you're like asking too much. You predict the future. I mean, nobody can predict the future. I understand that, science has prediction models. I get that. But you're, you're asking for me to be some sort of, medium or something like that. I don't know. It just doesn't work that way. It's like,
well, just to clarify, like if you said,
I mean, the Bible tells us, don't test God. Don't do it. Just don't, you gotta, so yeah, no, it doesn't work that way. I think,
to clarify, when they say predict the future, like Oh, one second. Just want to, sorry to interrupt, but if
Yeah,
like
go
predict
ahead.
the future, I mean, if we die and go to heaven, that would be a prediction. That would be a successful prediction. So that would be good evidence of a God. Or if Jesus predicted he'd rise from the dead, or there's that one thing in Ezekiel where God says if you put a cloth in water and pray to him, it'll burst into flames. That would be a great prediction. So predict the future doesn't literally mean psychically know everything that's going to happen. It just means like scientifically the asteroid will come around every 500 years or something. Like that's good enough. So it's not like as
Sure, but that's
precise as what you're saying.
yeah. No, I mean, you're trying to apply the scientific method, which by the way was invented by a Catholic. You're trying to apply the scientific method to something that is not science. It's just not. It's metaphysics. You know.
Well, scientific realism is the consensus among scientists, which is a metaphysical position. But the point here is that if you have no way to differentiate imagination from reality, and you can't measure whatever method you're using against something we know for a fact works, then that seems to be admitting that your method doesn't work, because it seems like we can't compare it to the things we know work, and it can't work in any other way that we can verify, which seems to be just like isolating it from any kind of falsification. It seems like, nope, I will not allow this to be applied in any way that we could actually show it could fail.
What do you mean by works? What, like, you keep getting back to this, like, does it work? What's your criteria for defining whether something works?
Can differentiate imagination from reality.
What if that's not really the most important thing?
I don't know what you mean. Well, like it's not the most important thing. I think happiness is the most important thing. So if you're gonna forego verification for happiness, I'm all for it. Go for it. I believe I am the smartest person alive. I don't care if there's evidence to the contrary. It makes me happy. That's fine. So I don't think it's the most important thing, but I think it is the most rational thing. If you want to have a rational belief, that's the way to do it. If you don't care about having a rational belief, then it's fine. I don't think it's the most important thing to have rational beliefs. But if you do want to have a rational belief, then you need some method that can differentiate imagination from reality. I think that's just like the definition.
I think you're limiting your scope with these sort of criteria of rationality and what works. I mean, I don't agree that personal happiness is the most important thing. I think, obviously, I would say loving God and loving your neighbor are the most important things. But personal happiness, if it comes at the expense of other people, is not the goal here. So I'm not advocating something where we could just sort of live in an imaginary world as long as we're happy. That's not what I'm saying. But I really think you are sort of like you're sort of limiting your scope by talking about what's rational and what works, and you're using these terms in very sort of scientific definitions. And the interesting thing, I mean, look, you and I both live by faith. We both live by faith. You put your faith more in science than anything else, and I respect that, but it's not what I do. I put my faith in my religion and in my tradition and in the revelation from my God as primary. I can't give you the insider's understanding of that in 1 hour or whatever we've got.
Well, just clarify, like, if you mean if I'm putting my faith in science and you're using the same kind of faith I'm using, then you're just using induction. So we can't be using the same kind of faith here, because my faith is induction. It's novel predictions and future success. And so if you're calling just induction, what?
That's not how I define faith. I mean, faith is not simply believing in the truth of something, but entrusting your whole life to that. And in that sense, I believe you are entrusting yourself to science in a way that I wouldn't. I'm not anti-science, but I wouldn't put that much faith in science.
Well, I don't trust my life with science either in that way. Science is just my way to differentiate imagination from reality. So I don't have any faith in my worldview at all. There's none. I don't do that. Because
I disagree, because you are, I mean, back to Pascal's wager, I mean, you are betting on the non-existence of God, and the risk you're taking is, I mean, whatever you want to imagine hell as, and I usually don't go down this road because I don't want to sound all preachy, but I mean, you are, if humans have an eternal soul, and if there is a God, you are betting your eternal soul on the non-existence of God, right? So in other words, you are placing your faith for your whole being and your whole existence in your belief in the non-existence of God. You are. That's your faith. I respect that because that's your choice. It's a free will choice. But that's what you're doing.
I don't understand what you mean by faith there, because I'm basing that off of logic and reason and evidence. So that's not, none of that is faith. That's
Faith
just
is trust.
But I'm not trusting them. I'm just using logic, reason, and evidence. So I don't trust anything there.
You're trusting it enough that you're willing to disbelieve in the existence of God, even at the risk of whatever bad thing might happen if you don't believe in God. You get that, right?
No, because I'm not trusting it. It's just the logic, like Pascal's wager, for example.
Yeah.
I need no feelings of trust whatsoever. If I'm just a computer just doing mathematical analysis here, the probability that belief in God will get you into heaven is exactly the same that the probability belief in atheism will get you into heaven. If there's a God, maybe there's a God who only lets atheists into heaven. And if there's no evidence for the Christian God versus this other hypothetical God, then the probability is 50-50 that belief in atheism will get you into heaven if there's a God, and it will get you into heaven if you believe in God, there's a God. So the probability is exactly the same. And if there's no God, the probability that you believe in God, because there could be some afterlife like Hinduism or something where it's a non-God based reincarnation or whatever. And so we could still have some kind of an afterlife without a God, in which case the probability of getting into the good afterlife, because you believe in God, is 50%, and the probability of getting into heaven if you don't believe in a God is 50%. Because if we have no evidence to indicate the fundamental nature of reality and which way it will send you based on beliefs, then the mathematical probability that one particular belief will get you into the good place opposed to another is exactly 50-50 or 1 in a million, depending on the number of beliefs. So if I'm just a computer, I have no faith here.
I don't agree with
the
that.
Probabilities. Well,
here's why I don't agree with that. Because if it is true that there is a God, and if it is true that that God has revealed himself to humanity in certain ways that tell us who he is and what he wants from us, then all of that hypothetical God stuff goes out the window.
Oh, absolutely. You're totally right. Because if there was actual evidence that indicated one thing over the other, then that would be a reason that that belief would be more rational than another. And so my question is there such a belief to believe those things are rational as opposed to being figments of human imagination? And if there is, then yeah, then I totally agree. We now have a good reason to believe in one particular God. But as far as I can tell, there's no method that you have provided or any theist has provided to show that their experience is more than just a figment of imagination, exactly the same as leprechauns or unicorns or fairies. And so as a rational computer who's just processing the information, there is statistically no difference between a person saying they had an experience of a leprechaun and a person saying they had an experience of a God. And so there's no reason to believe one over the other from any evidential standpoint of why we should prefer that belief as being more likely to get us into heaven as opposed to the leprechaun belief.
Well, I mean, let me say two things about that. I mean, first of all, I said up front, I wasn't going to be able to prove the existence of God to you. So you're just agreeing with what I said at the beginning. But secondly, you're talking about looking for a method. You're still trying to apply the scientific method to what is supposed to be a relationship with God. It's not a method, it's a relationship. And, you will only understand that when you're in that relationship. I know that sounds convenient for me to say that, but it doesn't make it any less true.
We got a question for the super chat. I'm not quite sure. How is God that commands love loving?
How is a God that commands love loving? Well, we use words like commands, but here's the thing. I mean, God is ultimate love. God has created humans. And one of the things that humans are supposed to do is imitate our creator. And one of the ways we're supposed to imitate our creator is by being loving. Now, I don't see why anyone would have a problem with that. I can't imagine anyone having a problem with love your neighbor. But if you're, when you use the word commands, right, always remember that, yes, God tells us what God expects of us, but we always have free will to reject that. So we are not being coerced even to love, so yeah, God is loving because God, if we're going to do what God wants, if we're going to be in relationship with God, it's going to be voluntary because God is love, and love does not coerce.
All right, there was a super chat earlier that I missed. It was, if God is loving, explain the Bible, I think was the exact quote. And the similar one, why does God drown babies? This is a quote from Pine Creek. It seems like that's one of the big problems for me in Christianity, is that the problem of evil. If there was an all-loving God, it seems like the Christian God does a lot of very evil things, and that wouldn't qualify as a morally perfect being. I think that if there was a morally perfect being, it would have given us a choice. For example, we could choose to come to this world that it designed with all of the free will and evil and pain, or we could choose to go to our own world without all of that stuff. And I think that would be a moral being if it did that, instead of forcing us to be in a world full of suffering and flooding the world, for example, and drowning babies.
Oh, okay, yeah. So this idea of choosing a different world that doesn't exist. I mean, then you'd need one different world for every person. But I do want to answer this. So, two things here. First of all, what you have to understand about the scriptures is that these are, while they are revealed by God, they are also written by humans. And so if, for example, the Old Testament says, God wants us to drown babies, it may not actually be the case that God wanted them to drown babies, but they are describing their experience of feeling like God wanting them to drown babies. So especially that's the case with the Old Testament. So
that's specifically referencing the global flood where God did the drowning.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, the flood. That's an interesting question. This is interesting because I've got a book coming out in the fall exactly about, like how we're supposed to read the Bible, what it is and what it isn't. And it might be interesting to come back and have another whole conversation specifically about the scriptures and what they are, what they aren't, and how we read them. There's a couple different approaches to the flood, but yeah, God's prerogative to start over is unique to God. So God is the author of life, and so God has the authority over life and death, and we don't. I don't know what else I can say about that. I mean, you want me to answer a question that's one of the greatest mysteries, and again, I would just say, the fact that I don't have answers to all the questions does not prove the non-existence of God, right?
Well, sure. It's an argument from ignorance to say that because we don't know, therefore something, whatever it is. But I would say that for me, this kind of eliminates the possibility God is all loving. The fact that he did an evil thing where he could have done a less evil thing proves that he can't be perfectly good. So, for example, you mentioned God's all powerful, so God could definitely create a world for each of us without much difficulty. He's an all powerful being. So giving us the option to go to this world or to design one of our own where he builds it for us. We just have like an iPad and say selections, murder, no, we're going to take that one. Rape, no, we're going to get rid of that one and just go to our own world. That's totally within God's power. He's an all-powerful being. He could definitely do that.
Sure, but I mean, it isn't necessarily what's best for us to be able to live in our own world where we are the center of the universe. I mean, look, people have tried forever to use the problem of evil as an argument against the existence of God. Most of the evil in the world is the result of the misuse of human free will. God did not design people to be isolated, live in their own world where they're the center of their own universe and their own highest authority. God designed people to be in relationship and in community. And there is a sense in which the universe we have is the best of all possible universes. But most of the evil in the world is really just simply the result of people misusing their free will and being selfish.
I don't think I would agree with that. I think that natural evils far outweigh human evils, like tornadoes, hurricanes, death, disease. All of those things seem to way outweigh the evil that humans do.
Well, not all death is an evil. I mean, again, from the Christian perspective, death is the doorway into a more full life. So, you may not believe that, but you're defining evil in a certain way that I wouldn't necessarily agree with. But I don't believe, but I also don't agree with you that sort of natural disasters outweigh evil that is the result of human free will. I think by far most evil in the world is the direct or indirect result of what we would call sin, the misuse of human free will.
Yeah. So I think I would disagree there. I would say that even if there was an afterlife, like if I punched you and then gave you $1 million, it would still be immoral for me to punch you, even if you got a really good reward afterward. It's still a bad thing to do the punching. So if God kills people without their consent, drowning them, hurricanes, tornadoes, whatever, aging, I still think that is immoral, as opposed to God just being like, hey, would you guys want to go to heaven? Option A, choose. I won't kill you. It's up to you. That would still be significantly more moral from my perspective than killing them without their consent, the punching in the face part.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, if you get to decide what's good and evil, that makes you God.
Well, yes, I'm not deciding. I think I've discovered. I think I'm a moral realist. Most atheist philosophers are moral realists. So they believe there is an objective morality, and drowning babies, for example, would be of the most likely to be immoral things. Based on all the evidence we have, that seems to be definitely not one of the moral things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's very easy to just say, "What about the flood? What about the flood?" It's the question is bigger than that, and again, we have to. I mean, part of being a Christian is being willing to sort of say, well, there are these mysteries I can't explain, and I refuse to demand explanations for all of them in order for me to believe.
But that's fair. I mean, and the reason I bring up the flood is just because it's an easy example. Like another one, my favorite quote in the Bible is 2 Kings 2:24, the one where the kids made fun of the bald guy and God sent 2 bears to maul them all. That one was that's just a hilarious
Yeah,
quote.
you know what? Let's stick with the New Testament. I mean, the Old Testament is kind of a one thing. The New Testament is another thing, and the Christian faith, while rooted in the Old Testament, is based more directly on the New Testament.
All right, so we got another super chat from Marty Mad Scientist. It's the problem of divine hiddenness. Why are there so many disbelievers? Why didn't God just allow the believers to live?
I mean, at some point, the more God reveals himself, the more God proves his existence. At some point, it would cross a line into coercion. It would cross a line into people believe because they have to, not because of free will. I can't answer the question of why God chooses. I mean, like we can ask all day, why does God do this? Why doesn't God do that? I can't answer the questions of why God chooses to do or not do X, Y, Z. But I do know this, that because God is love, faith has to be voluntary, and too much proof would be a form of coercion.
I did have a question about that too, because for me, even if I met God personally, I still wouldn't worship him because I think he's evil because of all the evil done in the Bible. So isn't it possible to still have evidence of God and not believe in a God? Like Satan doesn't believe in a God. I think that's in the Bible that even though he believes God exists, he doesn't worship God. Same with the demons. So it seems like we could have all the evidence of God in the world and not believe in him just fine.
Sure. Well, yeah, theoretically that's true. I mean, that is the case with as you say, with the demons, the demons know that God exists, but they don't worship him. But I don't know what would the point of that be? I mean,
Well, the point is just that God could still provide real evidence, and we wouldn't be coerced into believing him. We could still say, "Yeah, I acknowledge you exist, but I don't like you," or something. So it seems like we could still choose to have faith in God, even if there was evidence he exists.
Theoretically, but that isn't the universe we live in, apparently.
Okay. Super chat from Travis Statham. Professor, do you accept special pleading fallacies?
I don't know what that means. I see things in the chat like people saying, I'm getting angry, it's special pleading. I'm not angry. I'm just passionate about this stuff because I believe it very strongly. I mean, regardless of what's in the chat, you know, we're having a good conversation here. I feel like we respect each other.
Absolutely.
I'm just sort of passionately explaining what I believe. I'm not even preaching. I'm just you know, I'm being the witness.
Yeah. I want to say you are a gracious guest. I really enjoy talking to you. I've had some really terrible guests on. You're nowhere near them, so
Okay,
I
good.
think that you're definitely one of the. I really like talking to you, so for sure.
Good.
And just the chat is always mean. That's just, it's a part of social media. The chat does the chat things. It's a way to like express yourself in places where you don't normally get to. It's a what's it, release mechanism.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, again, you know, it does get back to personal experience. And, you know, I am absolutely confident based on my own personal experience in the existence of God. But again, you know, I can't give you my experience. All I could say is, you know, there's a certain open-mindedness that would be required for someone to have any personal experience with God, because if a person is obstinate against God, God is going to leave that person alone, you know?
Oh, that's what the special pleading means. Saying that two things that have exactly the same properties, one is special because of some non-discernible property. So, like if I say Hindu miracles and Christian miracles are different, even though all of the evidence is exactly the same, because Christians are, if you have a relationship with God, it's special or something along those. That's the special pleading. That's what it means.
Well, you know, all I'm saying is, you know, we could talk theologically about the nuances of the differences between different faiths, but the bottom line is, you know, the Christian experience is different because I've had it. You know, I have not had the Buddhist experience or the Hindu experience. I have the Christian experience. That's my testimony. That's what it is. I mean, I'm, you know, all I can do is witness to what I've experienced.
Do you think that the Hindus and the Buddhists are rational for believing in their gods because they've had the personal experiences?
I can't answer that. I from what I've read of Buddhism, I have real respect for it. I have not read enough Hinduism to even begin to answer that. So that's, you know, that's just outside of my area.
All right. Super chat from Zach. How is the threat of hell not coercion?
Well, because you always have the free will to turn to God and not go to hell. It's not, no one's coercing you to go to hell. I mean, I don't even need to tell you. You already know, even the atheists already know at least the first step of what it would take to enter into a relationship with God. Just be open to God, talk to God and say, hey, God, if you're real, you know, come into my life and, you know, let's talk. You know that much. You don't need me to tell you that. And so it may take time. It may take a long time. You know, God is not a vending machine, so you can't just put a quarter in and expect God to jump, right? So it may take time, but, you know, we all have that free will. We all have that free will.
To me, it's like if the Nazi asked, "Would you like the firing squad or the gas chamber?" and says, "Well, you have the free will to choose," it's still coercion, as far as I can tell. I don't see why that wouldn't still.
No, that's a terrible analogy, because it's not the firing squad or the gas chamber. It's the firing squad or freedom. That's the choice.
Well, because again, I wouldn't worship God because I think he's evil. So for me, that would be the firing squad, and the gas chamber would be.
Okay, so I hear you saying that, but all I can say is, from my experience and the experience of billions of other Christians throughout history, God is so much the opposite of evil. I wish I could express it all.
Well, sure, but so from our perspective, from the atheist perspective, it seems like God is the Nazi saying, pick the firing squad or the gas chamber. And if we really had free choice, we could just say neither. I'd like neither of those two, please. And so the fact that he's giving us a choice between two things we don't want doesn't seem to be a choice. It seems to be coercion. It seems to be something that's forced on us.
I don't think that's logical, because for free will to be free, it does not mean that you have to have unlimited choices, right? I mean, if God were to say, pick a fruit and here's a basket of all apples and that's all there is, well, that's not free will. But if you can pick a fruit from hundreds of different fruits, you don't get to say, well, because there aren't an unlimited number of fruits, that's not free will. No, it doesn't have to be, on your terms for it to be
right.
free will.
I totally agree. So free will is, you can have free will even if in the gas chamber firing squad you still have free will. The problem is it's coercion. So you still have free will, but you're coerced to do.
No, I don't think
one of
so.
them.
I think in that analogy the choices are limited. But I mean, that's that. I don't think that's a good analogy for what God offers us.
All right. Super chat from Charles. Other than thoughts and feeling, how does God interact in our shared reality? Does he still control the weather or anything else?
Yeah, by the way, so the super chat, $5. Like, do I get $2.50 for answering that question? How does that work?
No, you can get a negative $2.50 if you can like owe me money. That'll work.
No. How does God interact in our shared reality? Yeah, I mean, it is a subjective experience, so it's hard to explain. There obviously are thoughts and feelings, to use your quote. There are worship experiences. There are answered prayers. There are relationships with other people in which we feel the presence of God. So God interacts in my reality and in my shared reality on a daily basis to the extent that I continually welcome him into my life and have an ongoing conversation with him. And does he still control the weather? I mean, I personally don't believe that God controls every minute thing. Like, is it going to rain tomorrow? I don't believe, God is like sitting there making a decision about whether it's going to rain. I think in general, I think God created the best of all possible universes, and sometimes it rains, depending on the scientific stuff, when the pressure and the water and sometimes it rains. Sometimes there are tornadoes. Sometimes people get in the way of those tornadoes. God didn't decide to make a tornado that might hurt people, but in this universe in which we live, those things do happen.
I love that. Get in the way of the tornadoes, like the tornado chasers. They get in the way of the tornadoes. All right. Question from Trude. Do you believe that the Gospels were written by direct witnesses to Jesus' life, that it was Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John who actually wrote the texts?
Yeah, great question. And this is actually, now we're in my realm. This is my area of expertise. So I do believe in the traditional authorship of the Gospels, and there's hard scientific evidence for that, which means that two of the Gospels were written by eyewitnesses, which would be Matthew and John. Mark and Luke were not eyewitnesses, but were sort of secondary apostles, though there is a tradition that Mark was among Jesus's circle of disciples, but we can't prove that.
What's your position on, like, Bart Ehrman specifically says none of the Gospels were written by eyewitnesses. They were written down 40 years later. These guys were all illiterate. They couldn't read or write. And since the Gospels were written in Greek, these guys couldn't read Greek anyway.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a myth that's been well debunked. So first of all, the Greek thing, there's no evidential reason for believing that even a fisherman could not read some Greek, right? Because they have to go to market, they have to sell their fish, blah, blah, blah. But also what you have to remember is a lot of these New Testament documents were dictated to a scribe. So somebody like, Peter, let's say, does not even have to be able to read and write in Greek in order to just dictate to a scribe who writes it down. So that whole authorship argument is kind of based on a lot of false assumptions. In fact, not that anybody on this chat is probably going to buy my book, but I do have my newest book coming out next week. Has a whole section on the development of the New Testament canon and all of these exact issues, and debunks a lot of the myths. And I mean, and don't get me wrong, I'm not the one who's like discovered why these things are the way they are. I mean, I'm working from previous scholars and the latest scholarship. So but yeah. So a lot of these myths about the authorship of the New Testament documents are convenient myths for people who don't want to believe the content of the New Testament, but they are myths.
Gotcha. All right. Super chat from the Kenneth. Is the sense of mystery or claim to faith more important than determining if your beliefs are true?
Is the sense of mystery or claim to faith more important than determining your belief? Well, I mean, I think these two things go hand in hand. And, St. Augustine is famous for having first tried to figure out what was true so that he could then believe in it. But he discovered that doesn't work. So then what he did is he said, I'm going to make a commitment to believe and then learn about it. Now, regardless of how, you would prioritize those things, I think they go hand in hand, because by the end of his life, Augustine was saying, look, if your beliefs, if your interpretation of scripture don't lead you to love your neighbor, you're doing it wrong. Right. So, I know you're going to say a lot of Christians throughout history have been doing it wrong. You're absolutely right. That's true. That doesn't make Christianity false just because there are people who have been doing it wrong.
Sure, of course. That's always the case. There's people who've been doing science wrong for decades also. So
yeah.
Super chat from Adam. Chat is horrible. Never read the chat. Good advice.
Thank you.
Super chat from Locor. How do you explain infinite punishment for finite crimes?
Well, okay. So I'll preface this by saying I really can't, but I'll tell you what I think. I grew up in a Protestant denomination. And one of the things I was told is that all sin is equal in the eyes of God. I was taught that in the Protestant denomination. Later, when I actually studied the history of Christianity, I realized Christians never believed that for the first 1,500 years of Christianity. The original belief on this is that all sin is not equal in the eyes of God, and some sins are worse than others. So no, you're not going to hell for tax fraud. You're not going to hell for, small things. I mean, it's a bigger question that we don't have time for now, but God does not punish someone infinitely for, small finite sins.
All right. You'd say but not believing in Jesus, that would be one of the infinite ones.
Well, that is problematic because the life of Jesus Christ is the primary revelation of God. This is the number one way in which God has revealed himself. So to reject Jesus Christ is in a way to reject God. That's not me talking. That's just Jesus. That's Jesus himself talking about, but so yeah, I mean, I would say, and I'm not here. I don't want you to hear me saying only Christians can, know God, or only Catholics are going to heaven. I'm not saying those things, but I'm saying if you want to play the odds, the best way to be in relationship with God is through Christianity.
Does that mean you think non-Christians can get into heaven?
I think it is God's prerogative to save whomever God wants, and I would not limit God by saying, that yes or no to that question. You know what I mean? I think there's a very real warning in our scriptures about how we know God, and that there are more ways that don't work than that do. But I'm not going to be the guy who I'm not going to judge other faiths. I'm not going to say these people can't go to heaven or those people are going to hell. Yeah, that's not my job. And yes, I'm a Catholic.
All right, so I had another question. Do you think that is hell burning fire, gnashing of teeth, or do you have the view of hell that it's just not being with God?
I think ultimately hell is eternal separation from God, which is bad enough. I think for the most part, the fire thing is a metaphor. I think, when Jesus himself talks about hell, well, he does it a couple of different ways, but there's one that I'm thinking of right now. There's one time when Jesus talks about hell, and he refers to it as weeping, the place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. And I read that as ultimate regret. So in other words, it's more of an emotional punishment. It's more of a mental, spiritual, psychic punishment than a physical punishment. That's what I think. But I'm not an expert on hell, and I don't want to be.
Gotcha. Super chat from Taylor. If a claim of personal experience was incorrect, how does your method tell the difference from an imagined one's?
Yeah, again, I mean, I think what's problematic here is trying to reduce it to a method. It's not a method. I don't have a method. I have a faith. I have a spirituality. Now, if a person was a Christian and wanted to, come into deeper union with God, there are methods out there for that. But those are like prayer methods, contemplative prayer, things like that. But I mean, as far as like this kind of discernment thing, there is no method. It's not something I can say, here are steps 1, 2, 3. It doesn't work like that.
All right. Question from Javier. If Jesus and the Holy Spirit are God, the Trinity, there's no separation between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Would it be fair to say that Jesus did the flood or the bear's attack?
Well, I wouldn't go that far. You're trying to pin something that you see as evil on God, so that you can then say God is evil. So I would question your assumptions. First of all, you don't know the big picture. So it's not on you to determine what is evil, things that happened or whatever in a book that's 4,000 years old. Second of all, you weren't there, so you can't determine whether to pin that on God. So I just sort of want to reject that whole question because.
Oh, well, just to clarify, the question is specifically about Trinitarianism. Is if God is fully Jesus and fully the Holy Spirit, then anything God did, Jesus did. Therefore, because any of the bad things in the Old Testament, you can say Jesus did those things because of Trinitarianism if they're the same person.
No, I mean, I will say this. So I do, of course, believe in the Trinity, and I've got, lots of lectures about that. But there is so on one sense, yes, there is this doctrine, inseparable operation. Whatever one person of the Trinity is doing, all three persons of the Trinity are doing. So whatever God was doing in the Old Testament, the second person of the Trinity, the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, was in on it, right? But I'm questioning the assumption that you can determine which of those activities of God were good or evil. That's not for you to say. And also remember that just because the Old Testament says God did something or God approved of something, that might be the authors and their historical context and their feelings about God or their situation more than what God really willed, wanted, or did in that situation. So you got to weigh all of that.
Gotcha. So super chat from the Kenneth. How do you evaluate your personal experience to determine if it was corresponds to reality, especially when we know of issues in psychology?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say maybe a couple of things. First of all, I compare it to the experience of other people, both now and through history. So if I read about similar experiences in books and the people who had those experiences did not turn out to be serial killers, okay, all right. If I know other people in the church who have similar experiences and they're good people, okay. And, and I'm not, I do know right from wrong, so I'm not hearing voices in my head telling me to do evil things, right? Okay. So it's sort of all of those things,
Didn't many Christians end up becoming serial killers too?
Well, I don't know about serial killers, but there's certainly, you can certainly point to moments in history where Christians committed horrible crimes. That's true. So, but again, I'm not reading books written by those guys and trying to match my experience with theirs, right? I mean, if I have an experience and I think, ooh, God is speaking to me, and I find out it's like those guys, then that's going to be one way I discern, I should be careful of that experience,
Do you think those experiences would be sufficiently different, because from my perspective, I think the general experiences of feeling in commune with God or whatever are probably would be the same between both groups. And they'd also have additional experiences, like God said to rob a bank or something. But it seems like the vast majority of their experiences would probably be similar.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, first of all, if a person thinks God is telling them to do something that the revealed scriptures clearly say is a sin, right? Well, God's not going to contradict himself in that way. God's not going to say, thou shalt not kill, but you, Bob, I want you to kill that guy. That's so if Bob hears that voice, Bob's got to think, wait a second, I know from the Bible I'm not supposed to kill, right? So
Oh, right, I totally agree. But I mean, like, there's most people's personal testimony of God isn't like him commanding them to go do stuff. Most of it's like kind of like allegories to things they experience or feelings they get, or being around some kind of warmth or something like that. And in those cases, it seems like a lot of the experiences that even the psychopaths who do end up murderers and do say those other things that God told me to rob a bank, most of the experiences they have would probably be pretty similar to other religious people, don't you think?
maybe, but I mean, at the end of the day, the fact that those people did those terrible things means that we don't try to imitate them. We don't, if they wrote books, we read them with caution or not at all. And, we are very careful about, making sure we're different from that. I mean, I don't know what else to say. It's you're talking about Christians who commit heinous crimes are in a minority, right? So you're talking about a very small percentage of Christians over the course of history. So it's almost not, it's not something we worry about too much, but yeah.
Oh yeah, the question is more about the personal experience. Would their personal experience be equally as valid as other people's personal experience? I think that's like one of the other questions.
Right, but it's not, personal experience is not one thing. Some of their personal experiences would be valid, others would not. And I mean, unless you can get inside their head, no one on the outside can really judge that. I mean, that's between them and God. If they end up committing crimes, well, then it's no longer just between them and God. That's a different thing. But, I mean, I don't know what else I can say about that,
Yeah, it leads into the question. So is any claim of experience at face value evidence, including fake ones?
Well, look, if I'm the only one who has a certain experience, then it is evidence for one person, me. It's evidence that convinces one person. The more people that have that same experience, the more people are convinced. But I mean, I can tell you from, like the field that I teach, right? Think about the back in the Roman Empire, the early church, the church grew exponentially as people joined the church, right? Now, the church, people did not convert to Christianity and join the church because somebody said, I've had this personal experience that I can't really relate to you. It's very subjective, but you should become a Christian. That's not why people became Christians. People became Christians because the Christians were loving their neighbor, feeding the hungry, helping the poor, caring for the sick, right? They were doing the things that our faith tells us to do. And that was the witness that said, oh, we see what they're doing. There must be a personal experience behind this. And then when the Christians were willing to die for that personal experience, people said, wow, there's something bigger than life here. And people converted to the church and the church grew. And so, I mean, it's kind of like that.
Gotcha. Super chat from Harry. How can James have free will when he is convinced there is a God? I think this is a question about what free will is. Like, could you convince yourself the world is flat? Could you just choose to believe that? And I think no, because I don't think there's free will. So it seems like there isn't really free will because you're not able to change your beliefs when you want to.
Well, again, free will does not mean unlimited choices, right? So for free will to be free, it doesn't mean that I have to be able to choose anything. Like, you can't say that because I can't fly like Superman, therefore I don't have free will. That's not what free will is. Free will means that I have agency over my own actions and I have responsibility for them, right? So in other words, if I commit a sin, that's on me. It's not on God. God didn't make me do that. I did it. And I have to take responsibility for it. When it comes to belief, right? I mean, you and I sitting here are objective proof that God lets people choose not to believe or believe. And so that's free will. I mean, the fact that I believe there is a God does not limit my free will, right? I mean, you know, I guess you could say that, you know, my personal experience drives me toward belief in God. But if I wanted to be obstinate about it, I could just call it all coincidence and all illusion, and I could choose not to believe in God. I could. I don't, but I could.
Gotcha. Super chat from King Tiktaalik. If God cannot violate free will via, how could he have ever interact with humanity? E.g., hardening Pharaoh's heart.
Sure, the whole hardening of the hearts thing, that's another mystery. There is evidence in Scripture that God does intervene, right, in people's lives in certain ways. Sometimes even to sort of discipline us the way a parent would, limit the choices of a child by putting up one of those gates so they don't fall down the stairs, right? So yeah, I mean, that's possible, but it doesn't mean that God violates free will in an ultimate sense, but God is God, and God does sometimes intervene in our lives, which is what we want. I mean, if God never got involved in our lives, what would be the point? I mean, this is why we believe in God, because God does get involved in our lives.
Well, I think so. The question was,
let me just address. Emperor Constantine did not torture and kill anyone who didn't convert. That's another myth. Constantine was actually the inventor of religious freedom. It was a later emperor who made Christianity the only legal religion in the Roman Empire. So don't believe all those myths about Constantine.
So what were your thoughts on God violating Pharaoh's free will?
I mean, God had God's own reasons for doing that. I don't know. I mean, on the face value of the Scripture, it does seem like in certain cases, God limits free will. I don't know why.
Gotcha. All right, super chat from the Canonith. His description of faith sounds like belief for belief's sake. Please don't ask me critically evaluate, but it's true. Worse than special pleading.
I mean, what do you want me to say? It's the palm trees again. I mean, it's like, I live in the land of palm trees. If you try to convince me that palm trees don't exist, you can't, right? And I may not be able to convince you that palm trees do exist, but that's not on me to do that. That's not why I'm here. It's like, it's not really special pleading. It's more like me saying, and I shouldn't say this, but I will, I don't care if you believe or not. I'm supposed to care. I'm supposed to share my faith. I'm supposed to evangelize. I don't care. It's like, I will tell you what I believe, and whether you believe or not is between you and God. It's not special pleading. It's a little bit of misanthropy, if that's true.
Misanthropy, like hating humans?
No, yeah, like, people. I mean, look, people are idiots, right? And
I agree. I concur.
And so if there are people out there who are just so obstinate as to be closed-minded, well, that's on them, and so, yeah, it all gets back to the palm trees. I know palm trees exist. I know it exists, So
we got a super chat from Matt, and he put the question later because he mistyped it. So his question is,
somebody's asking in the chat, like, why don't I just keep it to myself then? Well, the answer is that your guy, Tom, invited me to this. I didn't reach out to him. He reached out to me. Like, I could be drinking a glass of wine now. So
yeah, and I appreciate you coming on too. I really enjoy the conversation. So I appreciate
even though I'm talking passionately, I'm not upset. I mean, this is
yes.
I'm in professor mode. I'm just talking passionately.
Yep. There's definitely a difference between this and like Jay Dyer. Jay Dyer was upset. Go see the Jay Dyer video for a good upset example. Why should we consider the feelings of Old Testament authors in regards to scriptural inerrancy, but not the feelings of New Testament authors? Could they be wrong too?
Okay. So first of all, let me the concept of inerrancy is a relatively recent concept. It's not originally a part of Christian doctrine. Now, don't get me wrong. I believe the scriptures to be infallible in the sense that they are reliable and they won't lead us astray if read correctly. But this sort of fundamentalist idea of scriptural inerrancy is not an aspect of the original church. Now, but your question is a fair question. Like, what's the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament? And I think with the New Testament, yes, there is still this aspect that it is the words of God written in the words of humans, right? So that we have to take the sort of cultural context and all that into account. But it's written by people who knew Jesus personally or who were part of the early church very close to the time of Jesus. And so it has, we read it with more attention to the sort of historical interpretation maybe than we would with the Old Testament. And again, I could go on and on about that, but
So like the New Testament authors were closer to God than the Old Testament authors because they had more of a direct connection, and so they're slightly more reliable or something like that.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of a maybe oversimplified way of saying it, but yeah, I mean, because but you got to think about it like this, right? Think of Jesus as like a kung fu master, right? And his disciples are his students, right? And their disciples were their students, right? If you want to get to the true, pure tradition of the kung fu style,
Jesus Wing Fu,
right? That's where you go, to the ones who knew the master, right? It's kind of like that.
Gotcha. All right. Super chat from D6. My religion offers more than Christianity. When you die, you'll become God in your own universe with the possibility to share reality with other gods. Membership $50 a month. Save 25%. So that's an interesting point. Like, would it be more moral to make everyone their own God in their own universe as opposed to subservient?
Well, but here's where you're sort of violating your own principle here, because it's not a question of what's more moral in your mind. It's a question of what's more true and what's more consistent with reality, right? It would not be consistent with reality to say everybody gets their own universe, everybody is their own God. You are not God, I am not God, right? So it wouldn't be more moral because it wouldn't be true.
Gotcha. All right, and that was the last one. We got this little funny goat symbol from Dima Music. I like that one. So we've been going for about an hour and a half. I want to be respectful of your time. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. Would you want to give a shout out to your book, your upcoming book, where people can find it?
Yeah, sure. So this is it's called Reading the Church Fathers. It's coming out next week. It's already on Amazon. And basically, when I talk about like reading the testimony of the witnesses, that's what this is all about. I could also tell people about my YouTube series, The Original Church. Go to whenthechurchwas1.com, whenthechurchwas1one.com. That's my YouTube series on the original church. And my books are all at drjimsbooks.com. That's my Amazon author page. So drjimsbooks.com.
Awesome. Thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I'll talk to you later.
Okay. Well, maybe we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
All right.
And you can just close the screen whenever. I'm going to start the after show and start talking to my audience.
All right. I will figure out how to do that shortly. Thank you.
Yep, thanks again. Talk to you later. All right, guys. After show time. Let's close that one. Go to Discord. Captions. Discord. After show. http:/discord.io/TJump. Tom, why didn't you push on the palm tree example? The palm tree example was just that he had past experience of the thing existing, and if there's past experience of the thing existing, it's rational to say that it exists. I probably could have asked things like, how is God related to pine trees? Because pine trees we have lots of empirical evidence for. And if people were like had past experience of unicorns or leprechauns, would they be rational to believe that? But we covered that at a long interval at the beginning, so it was something we had already talked about. Thank you, Best in Show. Really nice, pleasant conversation. Appreciate it. Tingle Tink, exactly. What did Tingle Tink say? Palming it off as real. Haha. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Jim. Matthew, I grew up non-denominational. What is up? Yes, I'm on the phone with the people on my YouTube channel.
Oh, sorry.
On the phone with like 200 people right now at the same time. It's a big phone call. TJump, are you rich? No. I make like 20 to 30 grand a year from YouTube's. I'm not rich. Send me money because I'm not rich. Yes, he was a good sport, Zachary. Zach R of Sky. Zach R of Sky. How's it going after show, guys, in the Discord? Simon, River Snow, Jeff. What are
I'm
you guys
good.
up- Nice.
I'm good too. How are you doing?
All right.
How did the conversation go?
Pretty good. He was a good speaker, kind guy, better than last one with the rage quit guy.
Oh, I missed a rage quitter. Oh,
Yeah,
shoot.
yesterday.
That-
Rage quit in like 10 minutes.
What was the name of the guy?
Dr. Frank Tipler, physicist.
Oh, I think I started that this morning, but my truck is too loud to listen to it. Yeah, I'm excited to look at it more.
Exactly. Chat was about his psyops as a response to my explanation above. For what purpose hardening throws. Ah, got it. TJump, are you lazy? Yes. Definitely 100%. Absolutely. Yes. I need the money. Yes, I definitely need the money. That is true. I need like $4 million to start my atheist church. I like the Jesus Kung Fu analogy. We call it Jesus Wing Fu. I do not like Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A is cheap chicken. It's not as good. Target chicken is better. Popeye's chicken is better. Cane's chicken is better.
What do you think of veganism?
It's morally correct. Please explain what the difference is between God and Padme. Bill's Kung Fu master and Kill Bill. God killed more people. Jesus learned Kung Fu from the Buddhist monks. Favorite video game of all time would be Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2. Ninja Gaiden 2 for the Xbox, Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2 for the PlayStation 3.
Are you a determinist?
Yes. Or in context of free will, yes. In context of physics, no.
Yeah, I think I'm the same way.
TJump, how would you summarize your discussion with Papandrea?
Who? Oh, that's his last name, Papandrea. Essentially, he brought up a bunch of arguments in the beginning, but then he said none of those are really good proofs, and then he went to personal experience. We talked about personal experience for a while. He brought up the BGV. I thought that was really interesting. I like that he brought up the BGV, and I got to show a quote of Guth and Lincoln saying that it doesn't actually show the universe had a beginning. That was fun. I thought you enjoyed biking. I used to enjoy biking. I'm too lazy now. I need to get back into it. I need to lose like 60 pounds.
BTV?
Board Guth Lincoln. The Board Guth Lincoln theorem of the fact that inflation must have a beginning.
Me and a friend were having a debate on. So suppose you could time travel back in time in order to change one event, which you know will have guaranteed positive consequences. Is it moral to do it without the consent of all 7 billion people on Earth?
It depends how time travel works. Like, suppose time travel worked and it would literally change or affect the lives of the 7 billion people, then yes, it would be immoral to go back in time to change the lives of the 7 billion people without their consent. So you'd have to ask every person at every point in time if they were okay with that before you went and did it for it to be moral.
Yeah, the part of the debate which we both were stuck on was I believe that, like, given that the individuals just won't exist anymore after the consequence of the action, I don't really need to ask them. And I sort of
Murder is a
went with the
crime.
entire.
So like killing someone, even though they will no longer exist, is still bad because when you kill someone, they stop existing. And so, but it doesn't make it okay.
Yeah, but that also feels like the entire one of the anti-abortion, anti-choice positions, which is basically like you should not it's a stupid position, obviously, but killing babies is wrong because they could end up growing up to being somebody great. Or like, would you want to be killed as a baby? Which is a stupid argument, because if somebody was killed as a baby, or like not technically killed as a baby, like killed as a fetus, they wouldn't know that they wouldn't have the ability to make the choice in the first place. And the same way, if somebody were to change time, people wouldn't exist to make the choice in the first place.
Yes. So the difference there is that if you're already in a time where they do exist, you're ending that current existence where they already have consciousness. A baby, if it doesn't have consciousness, killing it doesn't end any consciousnesses. So if you're at some point in time in the future where there are already consciousnesses and you're going to eliminate those already existing consciousnesses, that would be immoral. But if they don't exist, and you were just like already back in time, then it wouldn't matter. But if they already exist and you're going back in time, then it would be evil.
Yeah.
Overgiver. Have you thought of doing a tag team debate? Would be great to see you with King Xerxes. We do our Sunday stream every fortnight, every 2 weeks, and he's on there occasionally. If you wanted to set up a debate or something, that'd be great, but I'm way too lazy to do that. Thank you for the super chat, Akira. I recently watched Akira, the anime.
What do you think about it?
What do I think about what? It was okay. I didn't like it that much. Hunter x Hunter is much better. Wow, there's like 25 people in the TJump server on politics.
It's too chaotic for me.
Yeah.
It'd be good if the over talking wasn't so crazy.
Are you a mod on there?
Nope.
Why not?
Mod me.
I don't know how, but yes. So whenever you're on there, you can just say TJump said to mod me, and they'll send me a message and say, "Did you say this?" And I'll be like, "Yeah." Because I think
Alright.
I don't know who the mods are on there. One of them is somebody who I know. Taco should be able to do it, and King Xerxes should be able to do it, and Jack Burton should be able to do it. I think they're all mods there. Scotty, I think, should be able to do it.
I'll ping Scotty first. Let me see what that room looks like now.
See, King 101. Is King 101 the same as King Xerxes? Because they use like a similar image. I don't. Travis says, tried the carnivore diet to lose 60 pounds. I like food. I like food too much to diet.
Your room is full in the other one. Good grief.
Which one?
Politics.
You sure it says 24 out of 50?
Not full as in no one else. It's
Oh.
just a lot of.
Gotcha.
I'm just gonna listen in and see if it's chaotic or not.
Sounds like a good idea. I'm gonna move over there too.
I understand. From an
You
urban
came on
background.
Discord to make your life say more interesting, bro.
Look,
Shut your
No,
vanilla ass up.
no, dude. I'm
Wow,
on
he
Discord
called you
because I have
vanilla,
no
bro.
life.
I
What the fuck?
understand.
Wow.
You probably grew up in an urban environment.
Like if I had a life right
vanilla,
now, I wouldn't be on
Bro,
Discord.
come on, bro. Look, all we need to hear is so we can vindicate you, bro. We're here to help you.
No, you're
So
not.
we can
Shut the
vindicate
fuck
How do you
up.
know that? We don't know
So-
the full story.
Stale
So how
gaslighting,
are we
dude.
gonna know the full story, man?
Yeah, gaslight. I know he is.
Bro, we're trying to help.
What are you guys talking
It's
about?
not even gaslighting. It. That's not gaslighting. That's manipulating, dude.
What are you guys
It's
talking
It's not
about?
gaslighting, man.
I know. I just
What's the
literally said
difference
it's
from
not
gaslighting and
It's not
manipulation?
manipulating
Well, it's
either,
slightly
bro.
different because
Ho,
you're
stop.
goading because
Hey, yo,
because it's
yo,
Gaslighting is
manipulation.
manipulation.
Yo,
No, but it's a more complex
Yo,
manipulation.
what are you
though.
guys talking
but
about?
like just straight up like
It's
Yeah.
manipulation.
acting, pretending like
Listen
you're
to
their
everybody.
friend.
Shut the fuck
It's
up,
not
man.
gaslighting.
Come on, guys. What are we
You
doing?
need to shut the fuck up sometimes. Stop talking, bro.
Can
What
you
are we
like
doing here?
what is the
Yo,
topic?
why are New York niggas so uppity?
Dude, pretending to be my
New York?
friend.
New
Hey,
York-
I'm
New
from
York
New York. Who
niggas.
else is in New York?
No, you're not
Yeah,
from New
New
York. You're
York
from
niggas.
Montreal.
Well, yeah, I'm from
I'm
Montreal,
not from
but
the
right now
fucking
I
New
live
York,
Yeah,
in
so
New
you
York.
weren't born and
New
raised
York-
in New York.
New
So you don't
York
know
Okay,
what
but
niggas.
New
when
York
I'm saying
accent.
from, I'm saying
right?
Hold
currently,
up.
right
Stop,
now.
Yeah, but you're not in
stop
New York.
talking over me.
Acid
I'm gonna start muting.
project
I'm not-
niggas.
Yo,
I'm supposed
yo,
to be
I'm
in
gonna
New
start
York.
muting every one of you.
I know,
I'm-
but
Stop talking.
you said
Stop
you're from
talking.
New York,
Stop
so
talking. Stop talking.
Who
Topic.
else is from New York?
What is the topic?
Oh, it's
Yo, and
TJ
there's
Jump.
fuck niggas
The
in
topic
here,
is
bro.
who else is from New York?
Oh shit, boys! It's
no. It's
TJump.
it's
Yo, TJump,
it's
Oh,
mute
no.
Gator
TJ
right quick, please.
TJ
We're talking about a guy who called a woman a slut and assaulted.
Oh my god, can we just move on?
Yeah,
Let's
let's
talk.
move
I've heard
on,
this so
please.
many
Let's move on.
fucking
Yeah,
times.
sure.
I do want to
Dude,
move
I
on.
literally like left for my fucking
Luna,
Zoom
honey, you
lecture
gotta
and I came
calm-
back
you gotta
after
calm
2
down.
hours and you guys are
Whoa,
still
whoa.
talking about
Yes.
this?
Wait,
That's
Luna,
how Discord works.
Luna, you went
Allow
to
it.
hold on, Luna, you went to a lecture but you stayed in Discord?
Yeah, on Zoom.
What kind
The
of
lecture was
pussy
on
goes to a
Zoom.
lecture?
Oh, okay, okay.
Yo, I'm just
I
wondering,
thought like
bro.
you went into
Yo,
class
so
with
my
the
nigga,
Discord
No.
still open.
look, bro.
It
These
was a
niggas-
fucking
yo,
2-hour
yo,
lecture and I
yo,
come back and
Can
you
we
guys
get,
are
like-
still
we're
talking
trying to-
about
Yeah,
What was your lecture
because
about?
we don't have any
Yo,
lives. None of us have lives.
Bro,
That's
we're
why
not
we're on
trying to
Discord.
believe that
Clearly,
you're a
yeah.
back.
Well,
Yo,
neither do you.
Mr.
Excuse
Nobody.
me?
I know,
Why
his
else are you
life,
on
but
I
I'm
have a
Discord?
life.
You're on
Mr.
I
Discord.
use you
Nobody.
guys as fucking background noise,
Oh
dumbass.
shit! Wow.
While I
that's
Oh, wow.
study
Oh,
for
oh
med
my
school,
God. Oh my
dude.
God.
I'm
That's all you are, dude.
productive
I don't
shit
care.
than you,
Shut up.
Mr.
Shut up.
Hey,
Shut up.
I'm not
Bring up a
saying, hey,
topic.
Luna,
Bring up
I'm
a
not
topic.
saying that you don't
Bring
do
up a
more
topic.
productive shit than me.
Bring
I'm
up
just
a
saying that,
topic.
like, Discord, really?
Yeah, because
Yo, so
background
Mr.
noise. I
Nobody.
live by myself.
Oh,
I
damn,
live
I feel
alone.
I feel so
need some
degraded.
social
Okay, that's
interaction
great. Let's
sometimes.
do the
Yeah,
social
you live by
interaction thing.
yourself. You know
Bring
life.
up bring up a topic, some topic of something.
We're
that's
talking
actually,
about me.
Morality
Morality's
let's talk about the
fine.
benefits
Yo,
of
TJump,
Don't
can
give
you
a
mute
shit
that
about you,
bitch,
Luna.
compared to uncircumcision.
TJump,
We're
can you
talking
mute that
about
bitch,
me.
Luna,
Yeah,
please?
nigga,
All right,
nigga.
Luna, what's your moral framework?
What?
good
What do you
one.
mean? What do you mean by moral framework? I don't have any morals.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, this is the best we can
The
get
only
from
thing
her,
I
bro.
live by
Yes,
is
you
Mute
do.
her.
Rika.
Dude, we already know
Yeah,
this,
just mute
Luna.
her.
We
Just
know,
mute
we
her.
know, Luna. You have no
wow.
morals. You're a slut.
Oh,
Jesus
wow.
Christ, dude.
Yeah.
Wow, you really
This
want
is
to
how you
talk
talk
to
to
that?
women, bro?
Really?
Stop.
Like
Oh,
Luna's
This
not
is
talking over.
crazy.
Hold up. Luna's not talking over anybody. Like,
At least I don't just get a handy. I get a head too.
so let's go to actual topic.
Look
How
how many
you could have
babies have
delivered
you
that better.
aborted so far?
Stop.
You could have.
I don't give a
really
shit.
could
I
have.
don't give a
I
shit.
could've,
Bring
I
up something that actually
Thank
fucking
you.
matters.
okay.
Evidence, God,
What do you
philosophy,
mean?
any
Evidence?
topic.
Let's
You
talk about
Nigga,
God.
get the
Hey,
fuck
I
outta
believe
here
in
with
you wanna
God.
watch
bullshit, nigga.
evidence?
Yeah,
Fuck outta here,
epistemology.
nigga.
That's what evidence is.
My God is Yaldabaoth. He's a snake/lion god that was created by the mother of all.
Hey,
You want
this
to talk
nigga
about
wants us
Yaldabaoth?
Hey,
to
who's
be
the
his
mother of
fucking
all?
monkey for entertainment, nigga.
The mother of
Nah.
all is the mother of all.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I
This
got
is
no
boring.
further argument.
That's boring. I'm heading off. See you guys later. This is the freaking cancer and politics server.